Hey guys, tonight we're going to tiptoe, yes, very carefully, into the strange, dark, and occasionally absurd world of medieval executioners. Imagine standing alone in a crowd, everyone staring, hating, whispering. You're holding a heavy iron axe that smells like rust and rain, and you're moments away from, well, let's just say it's not a magic show. Being a medieval executioner wasn't just a job, it was a sentence in itself. And trust me, you probably won't survive this one. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who else is drifting off in our little virtual campfire of horrors. Now dim, the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a town that doesn't want you. You're not the mayor's kid or the baker's cheerful apprentice. Nope, you're the child of that guy. The one with the big axe and no wedding invitations. Before you can even speak, people glance at your cradle and whisper as if your rattle might be a miniature gallows. See, medieval executioners weren't usually volunteers. You didn't look at the horizon as a kid and dream of swinging the axe for the crown. Most often, you inherited the role like a bad debt. Your father was an executioner, so you became one too. It's not genetics, it's just that no one else wanted the job. Someone had to do it, and if your family already carried the stink of it, society figured, why not keep the smell in one house? Historians still argue whether some executioners received actual training from older relatives or just kind of guessed. Either way, there were no certification programs, no medieval LinkedIn for aspiring professional killers. You learned from the family, awkward, grim, bring your kid to work days, where instead of learning to bake bread, you learned how not to let a sword bounce off a vertebra. There are records of entire dynasties of executioners, families with multiple generations swinging the blade. One of the most infamous, the Sanson family in France, who oversaw executions for more than 6 generations. That's one seriously awkward family reunion. It wasn't glamorous. You didn't get fame, just infamy. Unlike knights or even lowly squires, executioners weren't admired. You were essential but despised. Society's necessary evil. And, unlike the village jester or the town drunk people, didn't even pretend to like you. You know how some kids pretend to be royalty, or dragons, or warriors. No kid in the sandbox ever shouted, "I call the headsman." Not even ironically. But here's a quirky fact, in some places the role of executioner came with legal privileges. You could own property when others couldn't. Some towns even offered tax exemptions, or, ready for this free ale. Yeah, nothing says thanks for the trauma like a lukewarm beer on the house. Still, none of it made you popular. Being useful didn't mean being welcome. Your presence was a reminder of the worst parts of life-death punishment, and the terrible fact that someone somewhere was always watching. Not just you, but your entire family. Your spouse, if you were lucky enough to find one, would share your social exile. And your children. They were stuck with your last name like a curse stitched to their tunic. Here's a reality check you couldn't quit. There was no resignation letter, no career pivot. If you refused to do the job, you'd either be punished or worse replaced by someone even more unskilled. So, unless you wanted a town riot on your hands because you let someone survive 3 beheading attempts, awkward, you kept your hands steady and your swing cleaner than your reputation. Some scholars speculate that in rare instances an outsider would be imported to do executions a foreigner, with no community ties. this helped with the guilt buffering. If no one knows you, then no one hates you, at least not immediately. But those stories are more folklore than fact, and historians still argue whether these wandering executioners were real or just medieval ghost stories with a sword. There's also the strange paradox you were feared, and yet people felt weirdly safe with you around. After all, you kept law and order just in the most horrifying way possible. You were a grim lighthouse on the edge of chaos, constantly warning people what happened if they strayed too far into crime. Picture it. You walk through the square and the air changes. People part like you're carrying the plague. Children peek from behind mothers' skirts. You're not a villain, but you're definitely not invited to the village bake sale either. And at night, when the work was done, you sat by yourself, probably polishing your tools, wondering if the next person would scream or pray. And let's be real, that's not the kind of bedtime reflection most people are built for. So you grew up fast. You learned early that your path wasn't going to be heroic or poetic or even fair. But it would be important. Terrifyingly, uncomfortably crucial. And all this, just for being born into the wrong family. You walk into the village square, and even the pigeons seem to steer clear of your boots. The blacksmith gives you a nod that somehow manages to look like a flinch. The baker stops kneading dough just to stare, eyes, narrow lips pursed. The moment stretches, and then as usual he finds an excuse to be very busy with not giving you bread. Welcome to the charming social life of a medieval executioner. Everybody hates you. Not just awkward silence at the pub levels of dislike. We're talking walk on the other side of the street, cross yourself dramatically, and don't let the dog sniff him kind of rejection. You're feared, sure, but more than that, you're contaminated. Spiritually polluted. Like an emotional oil spill in human form. Even in a society that loved rituals and hierarchy, your role somehow lived in a weird no-man's land. Too necessary to get rid of, but too gross to be accepted. The church didn't help matters either. In fact, clergy often treated you like the embodiment of sin. Some priests wouldn't let you take communion. Others wouldn't even look at you during Mass. You were often forced to stand in the back, far from the altar, as if you might infect the pews just by breathing. And no, the local barbers didn't want your business either. Not because your scalp was tough to shave, but because touching you was believed to transfer spiritual impurity. People feared they'd get a bit of your bad energy like medieval cooties. This idea wasn't fringe, it was culturally baked in. In many German towns, barbers had a right to refuse service to executioners, and many did so with gusto. There's even a fringe record of a guild petitioning to be excused from providing service to the executioner's family. His family. As in, your kids can't have soup or haircuts because you decapitate people. You may have had some money because the town needed you employed, and at least a little loyal. But money couldn't buy reputation. It couldn't buy trust. And it certainly couldn't buy friends. Now imagine being a child of this man. Other kids are out playing stickball or pretending to be knights. You're it in a game of tag no one wants to play. People whisper about your father, and by extension about you. The name sticks. The reputation sticks. And suddenly it's like everyone's forgotten you're a kid with thoughts and dreams and maybe a small rock collection. There's a quirky tale from 15th century Bavaria. The local executioner's daughter, just a child, was banned from dancing at a town festival. Not because she misbehaved, just because of who her dad was. The boy she was going to dance with got scolded too, for impure associations. Apparently, being an executioner's kid meant you could ruin someone's moral credit score just by twirling in public. Historians still argue whether these social exclusions were legally enforced or just custom, but the result was the same. You were marked. It's not like you could just move either. Sure, maybe you'd dream of starting fresh in another town, but surprise, everyone already knows who you are. Word traveled fast in medieval Europe, especially bad news and scandal. You arrive in a new village, and by the time you unpack your boots, the neighbors are already whispering about the new man with the iron tools and the devil's posture. Even your food was suspect. Some towns had rules about what you could and couldn't touch in the market. Imagine pointing at a cabbage and the vendor dramatically removing it from display. That one, that's yours now. No refunds. It gets worse. Some places made you wear specific colors. Not a full uniform, this wasn't the medieval Gap, but just enough that people could spot you from a distance. Maybe a dark leather band or a patch on your cloak. Something subtle yet unmistakable. Like a walking medieval Yelp review, 1 star, do not approach. Even physical proximity mattered. There are recorded cases where if an executioner touched your belongings, say your basket or your walking stick, that item had to be burned. Not cleaned, not blessed, just straight up incinerated. Because of you. Imagine having that level of unintentional chaos power. Someone bumps into you and suddenly they need a whole new outfit and a spiritual checkup. And here's the kicker, you still had to show up to work like everything was normal. You still had to climb the steps of the scaffold, take out your tools, and get the job done while knowing that the same people cheering your justice today would cross the street to avoid your shadow tomorrow. You were invisible until you weren't. Unseen until someone needed punishment. And when you emerged from your corner of exile to do your job, everyone stared. Not in admiration, not in gratitude. Just with that uncomfortable blend of fascination and disgust, like watching a toad eat a fly in slow motion. There's an open, scholarly debate about how much of this social rejection executioners internalized. Did they feel shame? Pride, resignation, some letters and legal records hint at bitterness. Executioners demanding back pay or exemptions, clearly aware they were being used and discarded like blunt tools. But others leaned into the role, becoming something between folk villain and grim celebrity. A few even got weirdly comfortable with their status. There's a fringe account of a Nuremberg executioner who decorated his home with mementos from his clients' tokens from the dead, like it was a very morbid Etsy shop. Whether he was unhinged or just had an intense scrapbooking hobby is anyone's guess. Still, despite everything, you kept showing up. Because what else could you do? You weren't welcome at the monastery. You weren't allowed to join a guild, and you definitely weren't going to be voted town alderman. So you lived on the edge of society literally and figuratively. Unwanted, unloved, but absolutely unforgettable. You wake up before dawn, not from a rooster, but from the silence, the kind that settles heavy and lonely when no one lives near you. Outside your window, the grass is thick with dew, but there's no smoke curling up from neighbors' chimneys, no bakery scent floating on the breeze. You live outside the town walls, not for the view, not for the quiet, but because no one wants to live within sniffing distance of a man who knows how to tie a proper noose. Your home isn't a charming cottage with lace curtains. It's functional detached, and usually built downhill near the gallows, the trash pits, or both. Welcome to your little corner of nowhere. The medieval town was a crowded place. Narrow alleys, livestock, roaming, free gossip, flowing faster than the plague. But executioners. They were placed on society's loading dock, always nearby because justice had to be fast but never inside. Your house might be technically part of town, but it was also spiritually fenced off like a haunted annex. Historians still argue whether these executioner quarters were official zoning decisions or just enforced by relentless social pressure. Either way, your neighborhood was a graveyard of opportunity. Nobody wanted to buy your house. You couldn't rent it. You couldn't really sell it. It was yours, like a scar is yours. And forget inviting people over. No one was coming for tea. No one was popping in to borrow a cup of flour unless they wanted to start rumors about cursed biscuits. You cooked alone, ate alone, and washed dishes while staring out at fields empty of anything but regret. Oddly enough, this isolation did come with a few perks. For one, you had space. While everyone else crammed into tight stone homes with 12 kids and a goat in the hallway, you had a bit of land. You could grow herbs, maybe keep some chickens. And because no one dared complain to your face, your dog could bark at midnight without a single knock on the door. There's even a quirky tale of an executioner who built a secret garden walls lined with thorn bushes to keep out intruders. Rare flowers he found on execution sites planted in rows. Did he find peace there? Maybe. Or maybe he just really needed a hobby. Still, the emptiness gets to you. Every time you walk back home from the city gates, past the guard who won't meet your eyes, past the children who freeze mid-laugh when they see you, you feel it. That invisible moat around your life. Even at night, the distance is sharp. When the town square fills with music for a festival or a saint's feast, you hear it only faintly. It reaches your home like an echo underwater warped, and distant a reminder that joy still exists, but not for you. There are stories of executioners sneaking into these festivals in disguise, cloaks pulled low just for a chance to dance or eat sweetbread without being spat on. But if anyone recognized them, instant scandal. Best case, they'd be thrown out. Worst case, they'd be punished for contaminating the celebration. A town once fined a man for polluting a baptism because he happened to be walking by the church during the ritual. You weren't even allowed to die like everyone else. Most cemeteries wouldn't let you in, not even in the shady corners where thieves and paupers went. Instead, you might be buried on the edge of your own land, or in a special unmarked plot maybe near the gallows you once operated. Imagine that your grave forever in the shadow of your own scaffold. In some regions, townspeople even burned the executioner's tools after his death: axes, ropes, hoods. Not to honor him, but to erase him. Like a hard reset on the town's collective conscience. But despite all this, you kept your house standing. You patched the roof, stacked the firewood, tended the garden. You built a home in exile, even if it wasn't much of a life. And here's where it gets stranger. Sometimes you were the only person willing to help those in even worse shape. The sick, the outcasts, the lepers. After all, you understood what it meant to be touched by shame. There are accounts of executioners who quietly gave bread to the condemned or money to widows using what little they had. Not because they were saints, but because they were already so far outside the system they had nothing left to lose. So, ironically, you became both outcast and lifeline. A person feared in the sunlight and a shadow of mercy when no one else was watching. Still, you never forgot the price of it. You'd lie awake at night listening to the distant clamor of the town you served. Laughter would drift to you like a memory, sweet, annoying, unreachable. You'd roll over, pulling the blanket tighter, hoping that sleep would come quickly, or at least quietly, because tomorrow you'd have to go back through those gates, back past the whispers, back into the job you never chose but couldn't leave, and back to your home on the outside looking in. You're summoned at dawn. Not with fanfare, but with a knock that sounds like it doesn't want to be heard. The town guard stands awkwardly, eyes locked on the horizon, holding a scroll like it's a dead rat. Tomorrow, he mutters, "By order of the magistrate." Then he's gone, probably off to wash his hands. Twice. You don't need to read it. You already know what it says. A name, a crime, and the method. Sometimes it's hanging. Sometimes it's the axe. Sometimes, if someone important is in a particularly vindictive mood, it's something worse. No one ever asks how you feel about it. Your tools aren't hidden in a dusty corner. They're polished, sharpened, and respectfully placed like instruments in a surgeon's cabinet, which, in a morbid twist, they basically are. You clean them not out of love, but out of necessity. A dull blade is more than unprofessional, it's humiliating. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Medieval crowds could turn on you fast if an execution went badly. It wasn't just oops and move on. If you botched a beheading, if it took more than one swing, you could be booed, pelted with garbage, or even punished. In 16th century England, an executioner once needed 3 blows to sever a noblewoman's head. The crowd was so horrified, he barely escaped alive. Justice, it turned out, had a strict aesthetic, so the pressure's on. You double-check the tools. Rope smooth, but not too soft. Axe weighted, balanced, silent. Your hands move with practiced rhythm, but your stomach still twists like it's day one. It never really stops. You just learn to hide it. The next morning, the square is already filling by the time you arrive. Everyone loves justice when it's theatrical. Farmers pause their work. Merchants delay their stalls. Children, God help them climb onto barrels for a better view. This is medieval prime time, and you're the unwelcome headliner. The scaffold creaks under your boots. The prisoners brought up usually trembling or resigned, occasionally screaming. And you say nothing. Your silence becomes part of the ritual. You are not the judge. You are not the priest. You are the blade, and blades don't speak. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, executioners were allowed to speak a single sentence to the condemned. A short phrase rehearsed and hollow something like, "May God have mercy on your soul," or "Make peace with your maker." One guy in Prague allegedly said, "Don't blink every time." Not for drama, just to avoid messy miscalculations. Historians still argue whether the condemned were always given last words or whether that was reserved for nobility. Some records suggest that peasants were rushed through like cattle, while higher-born criminals got time to monologue. Either way, you had to wait silent and still until your moment arrived. Then comes the part people think they understand, but never really do, because it's not just one clean swing. It's timing, angle, positioning. A hanging has to account for the drop distance too short they suffocate, too long, and, well, things go very wrong. An axe has to strike between vertebrae, not on them. And if the body twitches or the condemned flinches, that clean cut becomes a horror show. You learned the hard way. Or your father did. Maybe you still hear the screams in your dreams, and the crowd, they cheer, or gasp, or look away in just the right way to feel virtuous. But none of them remember the names of the people you execute. Just your name. The one etched in the town memory like a blood stain that won't scrub out. After the sentence is carried out, there's more. You might have to display the body. Sometimes it's a head on a spike. Other times, you cart the remains to a gibbet, an iron cage, where the corpse is left to rot in public view. Supposed to deter crime. Mostly deters lunch. There's even a fringe practice where executioners had to cook the heads before displaying them. Not in a casserole, don't worry, just boiling the flesh off to preserve the skull for longer. This happened in certain Germanic regions and was considered advanced deterrence. You can't make that up. Or rather, someone definitely did. And when it's all over, you're not thanked. You don't get a handshake from the magistrate or a gift basket from the town elders. You get a sack of coins, less than you were promised, and a request to please leave the square quietly. You walk home the long way. Not because you're avoiding people, though they'll avoid you, but because you need the walk to come down from it. Your hands still hum with tension. Your ears ring with the silence that follows a scream. Back at your lonely house, you wash the tools again. Not just for blood, but for something you can't name. Guilt. Dread. Just routine. There's an open scholarly debate about whether executioners became numb to the act over time. Some argue, yes, that repetition builds callousness. Others insist no, that the moral weight never truly lifts. Maybe it depends on the person. Or maybe the answer lies somewhere between your first swing and your last. One thing is certain, you never forget the face. You might not remember the names, but the eyes, the fear, the pause just before the end, that stays. And as you eat your dinner in silence, listening to a world that's already moved on, you wonder, not for the first time, how many more you'll have to remember before someone finally forgets you. Your days off, if you can call them that, aren't spent frolicking in meadows or dancing at town feasts. No, your calendar is mostly empty, except for the slow, creeping anticipation of the next name on that parchment. But even when you're not on the scaffold, your work continues in a way that's somehow more exhausting. Death's administrator justice's janitor. You see, being an executioner isn't just about swinging an axe. Oh no, that would be too convenient. You're also the guy who's responsible for cleaning up after everything society doesn't want to deal with, which includes a surprising amount of very unglamorous labor. Let's start with the gibbet. Remember that iron cage where bodies were displayed as a warning? Well, guess who has to set it up? You. And guess who has to deal with the aftermath when the birds rain and time have had their go? Also you. One medieval Swiss account even refers to the executioner's duty to empty the maggots. Yeah, that's in the job description. Hope you brought gloves. You didn't. It's the 14th century. Good luck. And that's not all. You're called to handle animal carcasses, clean plague-infected homes, dispose of sewer-clogging debris, and sometimes even flog prisoners. Basically, if it's unpleasant, dangerous, or smells like it should come with a warning label, it's yours. You are the municipal mop. There's one quirky tidbit from 15th century Germany where the executioner was hired to dispose of an entire whale that had beached upriver. Whale removal. Inland. His reward. A public thank you and a single, very confused horseshoe. Historians still aren't sure what that was meant to symbolize luck, maybe, or just the town's budget running out of coins. Sometimes you're even hired to do what other people can't or won't like amputating limbs for medical reasons. Yep. Before trained surgeons became common, you were the closest thing to a professional cutter. A broken arm infected. That's a job for the guy with the axe and disturbingly steady hands. A gangrenous foot, step right up. No diploma necessary, just years of practice and a stomach like a stone. And don't think people respected you for it. Oh no. Even if you saved a life, no one invited you to dinner afterward. You were thanked with eyes-averted coins tossed like scraps, and a door closed too quickly behind you. Historians still argue whether executioners actively sought these additional duties for survival, or if towns simply dumped every unclean task on them without consent. Either way, it was how you made ends meet. The official pay for executing someone might be delayed or conveniently lost, so you took side gigs wherever you could. Morbid moonlighting, if you will. On particularly grim days, you might even be in charge of torture. Not because you enjoy it, but because someone decided the guy who beheads people is probably good at tying knots. And here the line between justice and cruelty blurs, until you can't quite tell if you're enforcing law or just feeding a system that's desperate to feel powerful. You learn to build contraptions. Racks. Stocks. Devices with names that sound like they belong in bedtime fairy tales, but are anything but charming. The Pear of Anguish, any one. Or the Spanish tickler, which, spoiler alert, does not tickle. Your workshop becomes a dark museum of anatomy and authority. And just when you think your shift might finally be over, the magistrate sends for you to accompany a group of guards into the countryside. A criminal has fled, and apparently the town believes you possess a supernatural ability to inspire surrender. Or maybe they just like having someone expendable along. Either way, off you go, trudging through mud, armed not just with weapons, but with reputation, that cloud of menace that hovers around you like the world's least welcome perfume. Sometimes the fugitive runs. Sometimes they fight. Once in a while, they fall to their knees and beg, staring at you like you're not a man but a monster dressed as one. And for just a second, you feel it, the weight of being someone else's nightmare. There are strange perks, of course. You get free passage through toll gates. No one taxes the executioner. Not because they like you, but because the people at the gates don't want you touching their paperwork. You walk up, flash your grim little pass, and the guards step back like you just sneezed poison. So, there's that. There's also the weird social loophole. While you're hated in public, you're needed in secret. Nobles occasionally send you coded messages asking for private services. A duel gone wrong, perhaps. Or a discreet punishment for a servant who stole wine. One account from 14th century France describes an executioner being quietly ushered into a castle through the kitchen, tasked with delivering justice the law never even saw. But these shadows pile up. Every small task, every grotesque request becomes another pebble in the mountain you carry. You're not just the face of death, you're the town's moral garbage bin. And it starts to feel like the people dumping their filth on you are dirtier than the work itself. You go home exhausted, not just physically, but philosophically. What does it say about a town that relies on someone it refuses to acknowledge as human? What does it say about you that you're still doing it? You wash your hands until they're raw, but you still smell iron under your nails. You stare into the fire, wondering if tomorrow will bring a name you recognize. A cousin, an old friend, a child you once watched playing in the square. Because no matter how far outside the town you live, eventually everyone ends up at your doorstep. There's a market in town every Thursday, and though you're legally allowed to attend, you might as well wear a sign that says, "Don't talk to me unless I'm arresting you." People part like you're made of smoke and sulfur. The baker flinches when you reach for bread. The seamstress just closed even though the sun's still up. Children are yanked behind skirts like you're the bogeyman. And in a way, you kind of are. This, oddly enough, might be the worst part of the job. Not the executions. Not the smell of boiled heads. Not even the funerals you're not invited to. No, it's the loneliness. The slow, rotting isolation that creeps into your bones and starts to feel permanent. You exist, but you are not of them. You're not exiled exactly, but you're not welcome either. Historically, executioners lived on the edge of society both literally and figuratively. In many towns, your house had to be outside the city gates, not for convenience, for distance, for containment. In Nuremberg, your home was marked with a sign that warned travelers, "Here dwells the hangman," which sounds like a Halloween decoration but was real-life social quarantine. You've got neighbors, sort of. The leper colony is just downhill. They don't flinch when they see you. They understand being stared at like a living caution sign. You exchange nods. Sometimes you even talk, but it's always short. There's an unspoken agreement pain doesn't need monologues. People think you're dangerous, or cursed, or both. There's a mainstream historical fact that medieval executioners were believed to be spiritually polluted. Some thought your touch could spoil food or make milk curdle. You once reached for an apple at market, and a woman screamed like you'd drawn a dagger. So you stop reaching. You send a boy to buy things for you, one of the few brave enough to take your coin. You overpay him. He smiles anyway. It's the closest thing to friendship you've got, and even that feels borrowed. One quirky fringe tidbit. Some executioners got married, but only to widows' criminals or others considered socially tainted. In fact, in parts of Bohemia, a daughter of a thief might hope to marry the hangman's son. A grim fairy tale, but one of the only routes out of the gutter. Love medieval style. You do have family. Maybe a wife, maybe kids. But they live under the same umbrella of suspicion. Your children are called names. Your partner can't make friends. They inherit your job or your shame, and sometimes both. Historians still argue whether this generational cycle was inevitable or forced. Was the executioner's child always bound to the blade, or were they simply given no other options? Some think it was a matter of caste, others claim it was economic survival. Either way, you train them not with pride, but with resignation. And if you don't have children, then your tools pass to an apprentice, someone desperate or outcast enough to step into your bloody boots. You teach them the angles, the weights, the rhythm of pain and silence. It's less of a legacy and more of a contagion. You try not to grow attached. That's rule number 1. But you break it every time. In the rarest of cases, an executioner is granted a peculiar privilege, a coat of arms. Imagine that your family crest, featuring crossed swords or skeletal imagery, declared legitimate by a crown that won't dine with you. One famous hangman in 17th century Germany had his own insignia, a silver axe over a red field. Regal, distant, irony in embroidery, but none of that gets you into church. That's the final frontier. You might be allowed in for confession if the priest is feeling brave, but you won't be buried in consecrated ground. Your sins, they say, cling to your bones. You pass the chapel every day, hear the bells, see the people gathered in warmth and song, and you keep walking boots, crunching the gravel alone. There's a story passed around among executioners. One of your kind fell in love with a merchant's daughter. They met in secret, wrote letters in candlelight. She promised to run away with him. But the day before they planned to leave, her father caught wind and told the entire town. She was forced into a convent. The executioner was beaten in the street. No one was punished for the assault. After all, they'd only harmed a monster. True or not, it feels real. you've learned to guard your face, to keep your expressions neutral, your voice level, your body language small. You walk like you don't want to offend the ground, and still people tense around you. You watch from afar as they fall in love, quarrel, laugh over bread and wine. You sit in silence, carving bits of wood, or polishing the blade, waiting for your next job. Your next reminder that you don't get to be human like them. And yet, in a twist of grotesque irony, when they need something, when a thief breaks in, or a cousin commits a shameful crime, they come to you. Quietly, shamefully, with lowered eyes and tight voices. Please, they whisper. Can you handle it? And you nod. Not because you want to, but because it's the only way anyone ever looks at you like you matter. But it fades fast. The next day they're back to pretending you don't exist. Back to crossing the street holding their children's hands a little tighter as you pass. You've become the mirror they don't want to look into. A reminder of their rules, their punishment, their ugly truths. You carry their justice on your shoulders, and they reward you with silence. You don't cry. Not because you're too tough, but because even your tears feel like they'd be misread. If the town saw you weeping, they'd think the devil had possessed you, or worse, that you regretted your dark work. And regret to them means danger. So instead, you hum. Quietly. An old song your mother used to sing. You don't remember the words, but the melody is soft, and for a moment it makes you feel like you might still be something more than just the shadow that swings the blade. Sometimes you're woken before dawn. Not by roosters, but by a knock at the door, sharp official, no room for dreaming. It's the town watch. A man has been condemned, and it's time for his final walk. So you dress quickly, sliding into worn leather, pulling the heavy black cloak over your shoulders. You know the cloak isn't required, but people expect it. It makes you look less like a man and more like a symbol. Less skin, more myth. You trudge to the jailhouse where he's waiting. He doesn't make eye contact. They rarely do. You can see the fear behind his bravado, the sweat soaking his collar. He's young, too young. But the sentence is passed, and your role is already written. Today, you're not just the executioner. You're the escort, the keeper of order. You walk beside him through a silent crowd, your steps heavy, deliberate. The townspeople line the road, eyes full of judgment and relief. It's not them after all. That's the real thrill of public justice, a shared sigh of thank goodness it's someone else. Sometimes they shout. Murderer, sinner. May God have mercy. Sometimes they throw rotten food, but just as often the silence is louder. Children cling to mothers. Men press their lips into grim lines. You and the condemned march through it all like two sides of the same coin. One punished, one permitted. Both alone. Public executions were for many medieval communities a form of civic ritual. The town square became a theater, and you, yes, you, were center stage. One mainstream historical fact in parts of France and Italy towns built elaborate scaffolds with banners and seating, turning death into a grisly festival. Vendors sold pies. Clergy read prayers. Jugglers sometimes performed between punishments. It was justice and entertainment. You arrive at the scaffold. It's already set up, ropes, checked blade, polished platform swept. You glance at the crowd. All eyes on you. You take a deep breath and turn to the condemned. There's a script, and you know it well. A final confession, a moment of prayer, sometimes a blindfold. You offer it. He refuses. His legs tremble. You help him up the stairs gently, like a father guiding a child who's learning to walk. The irony doesn't escape you. The priest murmurs something and the town bell tolls. You raise your hand. The crowd hushes. This is the moment people will talk about at dinner tonight, whispering as they chew mutton. Did you see how calm he was? Or did you see the blood spray? But you don't focus on that. You focus on the angle, the rhythm, the swing. Precision over spectacle. Mercy over mess. You deliver the blow. It's quick, clean. You always aim to make it so. The body jerks, then stills. The crowd breathes again. Execution complete. But your job isn't over. Now comes the display. You pick up the head and hold it aloft. Not because you enjoy it, but because it's expected. Justice must be seen to be believed. Some say you should shout the man's name or his crime. Others say silence is more chilling. Today you say nothing. Just hold the head for a beat, then lower it gently. Historians still debate whether executioners internalized this pageantry or performed it like automatons. Was the act of holding up the head a personal choice or a cultural script? Did it give you power or just protect your anonymity by making you seem inhuman? Either way, you step down. Your hands are steady, but your heart beats fast. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the ancient, terrible gravity of being the one to end a life. You carry the body away or leave it for the magistrates depends on the sentence. If dismemberment is ordered, you do it there. Arms and legs nailed to gates as warnings. Your work made grotesquely public, the body torn into messages. It's not always a beheading. Sometimes it's hanging. Sometimes burning. The method depends on the crime, the era, the mood of the council. Once you were ordered to boil a man alive. Yes, boil. A punishment saved for coin counterfeiters in 16th century England. You remember the sound. You wish you didn't. Sometimes they don't die fast. And that stays with you. The time the rope was too short and the man strangled slowly. The time the fire didn't catch and you had to stoke it. The audience grew restless, but you knew the condemned felt every second. It's nights like those you don't sleep. You stare at the ceiling, wondering if you could have done something, should have done something. But the script was followed. The law was honored. That's what you tell yourself. Then there are the quiet ones. The old woman accused of witchcraft, who walked to the stake without fear. The soldier who kissed your hand before dying. The thief who confessed weeping and thanked you for ending his misery. These stay with you too, like ghost stories you carry in your ribs. One strange historical tidbit. In 18th century Prussia, a condemned man once bribed an executioner to make the cut more dramatic so his family might collect coins from a sympathetic crowd. The executioner complied. The man gave a speech, shed tears on cue, and the swing was extra theatrical. The crowd went wild. It was his final performance. You finish your work. Wash your hands. Sometimes in wine if water isn't nearby. You wipe your blade, careful not to nick yourself. You take off the cloak and fold it neatly. The day's over, except it never really is. Later, you'll hear people in the tavern talking, laughing about the execution, guessing how long the man's body will hang at the gate. They don't see you in the corner sipping your drink alone. Or maybe they do, and they just pretend not to. You try not to judge. You know this spectacle is part of what keeps their world in place, keeps fear where it belongs. But still you wonder about the boy, the parents, the moment the sentence was read and something inside him broke. You wonder what he dreamed the night before, if he slept at all, And you wonder if someday you'll walk up those stairs in his place. There's a damp chill in the air today, and that usually means one thing: it's time to dispose of the remains. The execution is long over, but someone has to deal with what's left. Headless bodies, burned, bones, limp ropes swinging in the wind. And of course that someone is you. Nobody else is rushing forward to clear away what they all stood and cheered for yesterday. You've got a cart, 2 shovels, and a pair of gloves that barely help with the smell. It clings to you anyway, sweet rot and scorched hair. It'll stay in your nostrils for days. You sometimes rub vinegar under your nose just to mute it. Handling the aftermath might be even more miserable than the act itself. See, at least when you're swinging the sword or tightening the noose, there's a clear sense of purpose, however twisted. But once the crowd goes home and the prayers are said, it's just you and the consequences. Today, you've been told to collect what's left of a man who was hanged 3 days ago. Left for the birds as the law requires. They always say that, like it's noble, left for the birds. What it really means is you're about to scrape half a man off a wooden beam and pretend it's just another part of the job. You try not to look at the face, though by now it barely resembles one. You cut the rope. The body slumps with a wet thud. A few onlookers watch from a distance, but they don't wave. One covers their nose. Another whispers something and hurries away. You're part Grim Reaper, part sanitation crew. One mainstream historical fact: in medieval England, traitors' bodies were often quartered and sent to different cities. Heads on spikes, limbs on walls. A traveling warning system, you might say. And who prepped those pieces for delivery? Guess. You load the body onto the cart. It's heavy and stiff. Rigor mortis is a terrible sculptor. You cover it with a stained cloth, not out of respect, but because people complain when they can see the faces. The burial site is outside the city walls, where the soil is thin and full of stones. No one wants the ground polluted, so the plots for criminals and execution leftovers are far from consecrated land. The grave is shallow. It has to be. You don't have the tools for anything deeper. Sometimes the wolves dig them up. You've seen that more than once, bones scattered like forgotten firewood, a jawbone with teeth still intact lying in the grass. You try to fix what you can, but some mornings it's just you and a broom. You dig. The shovel hits something. Old bones. Someone else's. You say a quick word, not a prayer exactly, more like an apology, and shift your hole to the side. You lower the man into the grave and cover him. The soil makes a dull, final sound as it falls. One quirky historical tidbit. In some towns, executioners used special pits lined with lime to speed up decomposition. Not out of compassion, mind you, but because space was limited. There was one in Lubeck that was so notorious, people called it the bleacher's den. Cheerful. Sometimes you're also asked to clean the tools after a messy job. Axes, knives, branding, irons. They don't clean themselves. And if the council's feeling stingy, they might withhold your payment until they see their own reflections in the steel. So you scrub, and polish, and polish again. The blood cakes in strange patterns. You pretend not to see the fingerprints left in panic. You focus on the shine. That's the part they notice. Historians still argue whether executioners developed rituals around this work, some kind of mental hygiene to cope with the physical. There's no consensus. Some think you muttered protective prayers. Others believe you drank after every job. Others still think you simply turned numb. You're not sure yourself. Some days you hum. Some days you drink. Some days you just stare at the fire hoping for nothing in particular. The worst part. Sometimes they forget to pay you. Yes, really. The very people who insist you're essential to law and order suddenly can't find the budget for your wage. So you go home empty-handed, having just disposed of a rotting body for free. Once you were paid in salted fish. Another time, a single boot. Just one. The mayor said, "It's a good boot. Keep it until we sort the rest." They never did. There's a ledger somewhere in town where your name is listed, followed by all your official duties. Executions, transport, cleansing, burial. Each with a column for payment usually marked pending. It's the one book in town no one argues about because no one reads it. You sometimes wonder what would happen if you just didn't show up. If the next time a body needed hauling, you stayed in bed. Would someone else step in? Would they cancel the execution? Would they even notice? Probably, eventually. But they'd complain. Say you were lazy. Say you lacked professionalism, as if the real shame isn't treating death like an invoice. You wipe the dirt off your hands. It doesn't really come off. The lines in your palms are dark with the weight of everything you've buried. And then you go home. The road is long. The wind picks up. You think about the man in the shallow grave. You didn't know his name. Maybe no one did. But for a brief moment, you were the last person to touch him. The last to hear his breath. The last to lower him into the earth. You wonder if that matters. If he felt it. If in the final seconds there was any comfort in your presence. You know you'll never know. So you light a candle at home. Sit in your corner. Sharpen your blade out of habit even if there's no job tomorrow. And you wait. Because eventually there will be another job. There always is. They don't look you in the eye anymore. Not really. The townsfolk, that is. Oh, they might nod stiffly or hand over a coin for your errand at the butcher, but their gaze, it skims you. Glances off like rain on slate. You've become something between a shadow and a rumor, a necessary evil wrapped in human skin. It didn't happen all at once. At first, after your appointment, they were curious. Whispered questions. Nervous chuckles. Does the axe get heavy? Do they always scream? But once they saw you work, really saw you, things changed. The man who swung the blade, who carried the body, who scrubbed blood from stone. That man was no longer welcome at Sunday dinner. One mainstream historical fact, many European executioners were legally forbidden from entering taverns, churches, or even certain market stalls. In some German cities, you weren't allowed to sit with the living in church. You got a special seat by the door just in case people forgot what you were. Spoiler, they never forgot. At best, they avoid you. At worst, they spit, or pretend you smell, or whisper about your mother. You get used to it mostly. You learn to walk with your head down and your ears closed. You find the alleys that are less watched. You learn which vendors will trade with you and which will snatch back their wares like you carry disease. Ah, yes, disease. Some people genuinely believe you're unclean. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. Just contaminated. Like the blood of the condemned somehow seeps into your skin and starts whispering. There's a myth that you can curse crops with a stare. You haven't tried, but you've thought about it when someone tosses a rotten turnip your way. Social life. Let's just say your calendar's not exactly full. You don't get invited to feasts, weddings. Only if someone really messed up the guest list. Children cross themselves when they see you. Even dogs give you a suspicious sniff before trotting away. You become a ghost in your own town, visible only when needed. One quirky tidbit. In some places, executioners were only allowed to marry other unclean professionals, grave diggers, tanners, even lepers. A real who's who of medieval romance. There's a record from 15th century Bohemia of an executioner who could only propose marriage if he sent his request through a town clerk to avoid offending the family. Nothing says till death do us part like needing official paperwork just to ask for a dance. So you live alone or near alone. Maybe a small cottage by the wall or a lean-to behind the blacksmith's. Somewhere out of the way. You grow your own food, keep to your corner, and try not to startle the neighbors. But loneliness, that's the hard part. The real killer. Not the sword or the rope, it's the silence after. The meals eaten with no one across the table. The birthdays you forget on purpose because what's the point of remembering? Sometimes you visit the brothel not for the reasons people think, but because the women there talk to you like a person. They know what it's like to be seen as a tool. They pour your drink without flinching, and that's worth more than gold some nights. Historians still argue whether executioners leaned into their isolation or fought against it. Some accounts suggest they built tight-knit families, forming their own little castes outside the city. Others hint at long, painful loneliness. The records are contradictory, like the people who wrote them couldn't decide whether you were a monster or a martyr. You try to maintain some normality. You chop wood. You mend boots. You keep chickens. But even those things feel strange, like a wolf pretending to be a shepherd. A few brave souls might talk to you children who haven't yet learned fear, or the old who've stopped caring. They ask you what you do all day. You lie. I work for the mayor, you say, which isn't technically untrue, just strategically vague. Your one real connection is maybe the town physician. They've seen worse, smelled worse, done worse. They might nod at you in passing. Once, one even stitched your hand when you slipped with the blade. No questions. Just needle and thread and quiet. You do have a few perks, though. People don't mess with you. Thieves avoid your house. Nobody picks a fight with the guy who executes people for a living. You could probably leave your door open and no one would touch a thing unless they want to find a head in their bed. Kidding. Mostly. You also get a few weird requests. People ask for lucky pieces of rope. Others want your touch to heal warts. One man wanted you to bless his newborn. You said no, of course. You're not that kind of professional. One day, a traveling monk stops by your home. He doesn't flinch. He just asks for water. You give it. He thanks you and stays for a moment watching the chickens. Then he says something you'll never forget. They fear you because you wear the face they give their sins. You nod, not because you understand, but because it sounds like the kind of thing wise people say. Then he leaves, and the chickens go back to pecking. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder what life would be like if you weren't an executioner. A blacksmith, maybe. Or a baker. Someone who brings joy, not dread. But then you think someone has to do it. And maybe it's better that it's you, careful, steady, even gentle when possible, than someone who'd enjoy it. You remind yourself of that a lot. Then you go to sleep, alone. Again, you dream about it sometimes. Not the executions themselves, strangely enough. Not the sword swinging or the rope tightening. You dream about the faces. Not as they die, no, as they wait. The fear, the pleading, the resignation. That part doesn't wash off. You can't scrub it away with vinegar or ash or prayer. It follows you a silent procession of almosts and should-haves. And, worst of all, sometimes, You recognize them. A cousin, an old schoolmate, that girl who sold onions with the wild laugh. You wake up before the blade falls. Now, despite all that, it turns out your job isn't as simple as swing and done. Oh no, there's paperwork. Well, not paper exactly. More like formal testimony reports to the city council witness statements. You're not just the grim hand of justice, you're also the guy who has to confirm it all went according to plan, that the sentence was carried out with honor and in good faith. A bit rich, considering they won't even share a pew with you. One mainstream historical fact, many medieval cities required executioners to record details of every execution method timing, final words, condition of the body. These records were sometimes used in legal disputes or appeals. You are effectively judge, jury, and historian of the dead, and if something goes wrong, oh, you'd better believe it must be your fault. Rope too short. Your fault. Rope too long. Still your fault. Sword didn't slice cleanly. You must have sharpened it wrong. Crowd got upset. You didn't read the mood. It's like being a chef where the meal always screams and nobody tips. You keep a small book tucked under your bed, not for the council, just for you. You write notes sometimes, things you noticed what the condemned said, how the sky looked. You once sketched a bird that landed on the scaffold minutes before the job. Stayed the whole time. Left with the final breath. You don't know why you wrote that down. Maybe just to prove someone else saw it too. One quirky tidbit. Some executioners kept a list of last words they found interesting, either out of morbid curiosity or because, let's face it, you hear some absolute gems. There's a famous case where a condemned man right before his beheading yelled, "I regret nothing, except that cheese I ate, bold choice. Eternal fame, lactose related. You're also responsible for storing and maintaining the instruments of death." That's a nice way of saying your shed is basically a museum of misery. Axes, ropes, branding irons, the occasional iron collar. They hang neatly on the wall. You keep them oiled, cleaned, sharp. You've even carved initials into the handles not out of sentiment, but because the council misplaces things when they borrow them. Yes, they borrow them. For ceremonies. Once the town staged a mock execution as part of a festival. Used your tools. Didn't ask. You got them back sticky with candied apple goo. You spent an hour cleaning molasses off a blade that's taken 30 heads. The indignity. Sometimes you're called to supervise executions in other towns. You travel with your gear in a chest tied to a donkey. Locals stare as you pass, part horror, part fascination. In one village, a boy threw you a flower. His mother slapped his hand. In another, you were invited to dinner by the mayor himself. Turned out he just wanted to know how heavy a head feels. You told him like a promise you can't take back. He didn't laugh. Historians still argue whether executioners saw themselves as servants of justice or necessary sinners. Some say they embraced the role fully lived apart, named their children with dark humor, wore red to town meetings. Others believe they struggled with identity, privately questioning their morality even as they served the law. There's no consensus. And no two executioners were exactly alike. You try not to think too much about what kind of executioner you are. Thinking too much is dangerous in this line of work. You just do your job. Keep your tools sharp. Keep your head down. But every now and then someone asks, quietly, usually when no one else is around, "Do they all deserve it?" You pause. Every time. What do you say? That you hope so, that you try not to wonder, that you've seen liars beg and saints go silent. that guilt doesn't always wear chains, and innocence doesn't always come with clean hands. Instead, you usually say, "It's not for me to decide. It's the safe answer, the correct one." But in your chest, the question echoes. You think about the boy who stole bread during the famine. They took his hand. You were there to hold him still. He was 13. You dream about his face, too. That night, after you finish your log and scrub your hands again, you sit by the fire and open that little notebook. The one that's just yours. You write, "Cloudy sky, cold wind." The man wept before the end. Said he didn't kill her. Said her ghost would tell the truth. I believed him. Don't know why. Then you close it. You sharpen the blade not because it needs it, but because the sound helps you think. And you wait, because the next name will come soon enough. It always does. You get the notice early in the morning delivered by a courier who doesn't step past your gate. He holds it out like it might bite. You take it without speaking. The parchment is folded neatly sealed with the wax crest of the magistrate. The message inside is brief, almost clinical. A name, a date, and one word that never fails to sink your stomach: beheading. You sigh. Another. You begin the quiet preparation. There's no ceremony in this part, just ritual. The old ones. You sweep the shed, check the balance of your sword. You test the rope on your backup gallows. Oil the hinges. Boil a poultice for your hands, they blister more than people think. The condemned is a woman this time. Young. Barely 20 by your guess. A theft gone wrong, they say. A noble's daughter dead. Poisoned wine. The servant girl caught holding the empty vial. You don't know the rest. You rarely do. Your job starts at the end. You think of your mentor, the old executioner who taught you the craft before his own hands gave out. He told you once, "We see people at their worst, and we must be at our best." You're not sure you believe that anymore. But you try. One mainstream historical fact: it was not uncommon in the later medieval period for executioners to be called to deliver the death penalty to women, though some cities were reluctant to use the sword on female convicts. Hanging was more typical. Burning was rarer, still reserved for heresy and other supposedly contagious crimes. Beheading a woman was almost ceremonial, implying the crime had risen to a particularly public scandal. The guards bring her the next day. She walks without struggle, doesn't speak. Her wrists are bound, but she keeps her chin lifted. You watch her for signs: terror, defiance, guilt. But she offers only stillness. A blank page. You show her the block. You offer water like always. She declines. She says, "Will it hurt?" You hate this part. You want to lie. You do lie. "No," you say, "it will be quick." She nods. That's all. One quirky tidbit: in some parts of France, executioners were required to rehearse with dummies, literal straw-filled mannequins, before a noble execution, especially if the condemned was from a prominent family. One clean stroke was not just justice, it was public decorum. Nobody wanted a royal scandal that turned into a hack job. You practice the motion that night anyway, even after all this time. There's a rhythm to it, like swinging an axe into oak, only the tree doesn't bleed. You wonder what her story really is. You wonder if she did it, if the vial was hers, if anyone listened when she spoke. You know better than to ask. Justice moves like a cart, with no driver, lurching forward, unstoppable sometimes, flattening the truth under its wheel. Historians still argue whether medieval trials for the poor were ever truly fair. Some say the system was rigged from the start. confession-forced testimony bought verdicts decided before the accused ever opened their mouth. Others believe that, while flawed, many cities took real steps to follow the law. The truth probably lies somewhere between like everything in your line of work. The day of the execution arrives. Rain threatens. The crowd gathers early. People love a spectacle, especially when it's someone who once served them dinner. You step onto the scaffold. Your boots thud against the planks. You check the straps, the blade, the block. The guards bring her forward. Still no struggle. Her gown is plain borrowed. Her hair tied back. You offer a blindfold. She shakes her head. I want to see the sky. You nod. You signal the crowd to quiet. It takes a moment. The hush spreads slow and heavy. You speak the sentence aloud. It echoes across the square. Then she kneels. You take your place. You raise the sword. It feels heavy today. Heavier than usual. You adjust your grip. She says, "Tell them I forgave them." Then you swing. Clean. One stroke. The crowd murmurs. Someone gasps. A child starts crying. You don't look up. You do the work. Cover the body. Wipe the blade. Step away. Back in your home, you remove your gloves. You sit with your back against the door. You breathe. Later, you write in the little book. She asked if it would hurt. I lied. I hope she didn't notice. You close the book. You look out the window. The sky is clearing. The rain changed its mind. This is the part no one sees the after. Not the blood, not the crowd, not the blade. Just the silence. There's a saying among those who work with death. Every life you end makes your own a little heavier. You've found that to be more than just poetic. It's downright measurable. Some days your bones feel like they're made of lead. Your hands remember the grip before your mind even wakes up. And your dreams. They've started to show up while you're still awake. It's midday. You're walking to the blacksmith's needing a hinge for the gallows gate when a child sees you and screams. Just a shriek, sharp and quick. Her mother grabs her arm and mutters an apology but doesn't meet your eyes. Of course not. You're the bogeyman they tell stories about. You get the hinge. The blacksmith doesn't say a word, just sets it down and counts your coin with gloves on. You nod and leave. Once upon a time, you might have been invited in for a drink. Maybe. There's no feast for the executioner, even if your name's whispered with equal parts awe and dread. You're respected the way fire is respected, useful feared, and never, ever invited into the home. One mainstream historical fact: in some medieval cities, executioners weren't just socially shunned, they were legally barred from entering homes, inns, and even certain districts. Their touch was considered tainting. You couldn't even borrow someone's cloak without rumors flying, which made laundry complicated. Your job doesn't stop when the body drops. There's disposal, burial if they're lucky, dumped in an unmarked pit if they're not. Guess who gets to do that? Yep, you. The city won't waste a priest on someone condemned. So you do what you can. A quick word half remembered from a sermon long ago. A fist of earth. A quiet moment. Then it's back to the next task. Today, it's cleaning the block. You've got vinegar rags and a set of nails to replace the ones that splintered. Maintenance. Just like any job. Only instead of dust or grease, you're scraping away history. Or trying to. One quirky tidbit. Some executioners became amateur anatomists. You hear about a guy in 14th century Bologna who secretly dissected criminals after dark, not for profit, but out of pure curiosity. He wanted to know how the body worked, what happened to the muscles when death set in. One night he was caught. The magistrate didn't punish him, they hired him to assist the university. Apparently, some knowledge is worth more than a clean conscience. You haven't gone that far. But you've learned a thing or two. How long blood stays warm. How bones crack. How fear shows in the feet. You know where the spine meets the skull. You know the sound it makes when the blade hits it clean. And yet, you don't feel like a killer. Most days, anyway. You're more like a librarian of final moments. Each one catalogued, measured, recorded. The condemned might scream or laugh or spit or pray. You've seen them all. But underneath it all, they're just human. Same as you. That's what makes it hard. Historians still argue whether executioners became numb to the task or carried the weight until their own graves. Some diaries suggest total detachment. It is a task no more one German executioner wrote in the 1600s. Others, like the English headsman who wept after every execution, seemed haunted by it. Maybe it's both. Maybe numbness is just grief in better shoes. You sit by the fire that evening, feet sore, knees aching. You pour yourself a drink. Not to forget, but to soften the edges. You think about the girl from yesterday, her voice. Tell them I forgave them. You wonder if anyone heard, if anyone cared. Sometimes you worry that the only thing separating you from the condemned is timing. Wrong moment, wrong alley, wrong witness, and you'd be the one kneeling. You pick up your book, you write. People still fear me. I understand, but I don't want to be remembered like this. I want someone to say I was careful, that I tried to make it quick. You put down the pen. The fire crackles. Outside, you hear footsteps, then a knock at the gate. Strange. No one comes here this late. You step outside, cautious. A boy stands there, maybe 10 years old. He holds out a basket. Bread, cheese, a note. You open it. Thank you for treating her kindly. M. You freeze. It takes a moment before you remember. The girl. The beheading. She'd mentioned a brother in passing. A quiet one. You never thought. You nod. The boy leaves. Doesn't speak. You take the basket inside. You sit. You cry a little. Just a bit. Because someone noticed. And that's enough for today. Some days it feels like you live in a different country than everyone else. A nation of one bordered by fear and superstition. You're not even sure if you still speak the same language. You walk past the market and conversations trail off. Not angrily, just cautiously, like you're the storm they don't want to provoke. A butcher who once played dice with you now weighs his cuts with eyes fixed on the scale, never lifting them to yours. You miss laughing in public. You miss existing without second glances. And now they've added a new layer to your duties. Body disposal's not enough. They want you to manage the criminal dead, keep count, rotate the burial pits, make sure the crows don't pull them back up. Because heaven forbid the afterlife be untidy. So you dig. You cover. You burn the worst of it. The wind carries the smell straight into your lungs. It stays for days. No amount of herbs or vinegar clears it. But you do it. Because you must. One mainstream historical fact, in many parts of Europe, executioners were responsible for managing not only the execution, but also the cleanup, disposing of bodies, cleaning tools, even supervising the public display of remains, such as heads on spikes or bodies hung in gibbets. They were the last custodian of both justice and shame. You try to convince the magistrate that some things deserve dignity even in death. Could we mark the graves, you ask? A small stone, maybe. He blinks at you like you've asked to paint the cathedral with soup. No, he says, they don't deserve that. But you keep asking. You carve a few stones yourself. Nothing fancy, just initials when you know them. A symbol when you don't. You place them when no one's looking. You figure that if you're the last face they ever see, you should also be the one who ensures they're not forgotten entirely. One quirky tidbit. A few medieval executioners became so closely associated with the dead that people started bringing them trinkets, not as gifts, but as offerings. Superstitions grew that if you dropped a coin near the executioner's home, your soul might avoid a purgatory. You once found a carved wooden doll outside your door. No note, no explanation. You kept it. It sits on your mantel. You call her Clementine. The townsfolk may shun you, but they still want you nearby like a broom kept close to the hearth. Useful. Tidy. Out of sight. There's a group of children who play near the gallows on Sundays when they think you're not around. They dare each other to touch the platform, whisper ghost stories about the condemned. You watch from the shed sometimes. You don't stop them. You remember what it was like to be curious. One boy, bold or foolish, once climbed the steps and mimed a hanging. His friends cheered, then scattered when they saw you standing there. All but him. He stayed. I want to be brave, he said. Like you. You didn't correct him. You just told him brave is when you can walk away. Historians still argue whether executioners raised families of their own or lived alone by necessity. Some records show family dynasties, sons trained by fathers' entire bloodlines known for the axe. Others show men who lived in the outskirts buried with no mourners. The truth likely split both ways. As for you, you've never married. You wouldn't bring someone into this life. Not when even the baker flinches when you reach for the same loaf. You've thought about leaving. Moving to another city. Maybe even changing your name. But the truth is, the work follows you. Every town needs someone like you. And once you've held this post, you never quite lose the mark. People can smell it on you. Besides, there's something else. Something you don't say aloud. You've gotten good at this. Efficient. Careful. You've learned to read people in those final moments. You've learned to bring a small measure of peace even when everything around it is ugly. That counts for something, doesn't it? You spend your evenings now writing more often. Not just the little notebook anymore, you've started a second one. It's more organized. Clean pages. Neat lines. You write down what you remember about each person. Where they were from. What they said. What they didn't say. You're building a kind of secret memorial. Maybe one day someone will read it. Maybe someone will see that you tried. That night you light a small candle for the man whose name you never caught. He died, saying he was innocent. They always say that, but something in his voice stuck with you. Maybe it was true. Maybe not. You whisper a prayer just in case. Then you blow out the flame and let the dark return. You wake before sunrise, though you barely slept. The kind of rest that isn't rest at all, more like your body pretending just to keep the bones from giving up. Today is different. A messenger came yesterday with a strange request. The condemned has requested you deliver the final rites. You blinked at the words. Executioners don't deliver rites. That's priest work. But apparently the local friar refuses. She's a murderer, he said, and unrepentant. So now it's you. You're not exactly equipped for this. But you agree because she asked for you. And how often does someone ask for you specifically without spitting on your boots? You walk to the prison just as the bells begin to stir the town. The cobblestones are damp from the night's mist. You step around puddles, careful like always. She's in the final cell. Thin, mid-30s, tired eyes but sharp. She sits cross-legged like she's meditating. A candle burns near her feet. She looks up and smiles. "Glad you came," she says. "I heard you listen. That hits harder than you expect." You sit across from her cross-legged too. She tells you her story not because she thinks you'll stop the execution she knows better, but because she wants someone to know. That's all. She doesn't cry. You don't interrupt. She confesses not to the crime, but to the grief it caused. A sister she loved, a betrayal she never expected, a man who lied and walked away clean. She says, "I'm not innocent, but I'm not the villain they've made me." You nod. You understand. One mainstream historical fact, medieval law, didn't require clergy to be present at an execution. In fact, many clerics avoided them entirely, believing that witnessing a violent death corrupted the soul. This left the condemned spiritually stranded, especially if they weren't deemed worthy of forgiveness. So, in some towns, the executioner filled the gap, not officially, not publicly, but quietly. A whispered prayer. A nod toward whatever waited beyond. You offer her a moment of silence. Then, awkwardly, you begin a prayer you half remember from a church service you hadn't intended to attend. She smiles again. That's enough. Thank you. You walk her to the scaffold yourself. Today, there's no crowd. The magistrate decreed the execution private, citing public unrest. You suspect it's more about avoiding another display of dignity from someone they'd rather see broken. The platform creaks under your feet. You've repaired it more times than you can count. The rope is fresh. You tested it yourself. She doesn't beg, doesn't flinch. She steps into position like someone boarding a ship. You whisper, "I'll make it quick." She says, "I know." And you do. When it's done, you clean up. The guards don't speak. They just nod, almost respectfully. You're not sure if they saw what you saw, that calm in her eyes, that faint smile just before the drop. You wonder if they'll remember her. You hope someone will. Later, back in your home, you write in the second book again. You describe her voice, her story. You copy the prayer as best you can, just in case someone ever reads it and recognizes the words. You draw a star beside her name. Then you turn to the first book, the one with your private thoughts, and add a line. I've stopped believing in good or evil. There's only hurt, and people trying not to drown in it. One quirky tidbit. In some remote villages, executioners were believed to carry curses in their breath, so children were taught to hold theirs if one walked by. But in other towns, they were secretly sought out for blessings. Touching the executioner's robe before a trial was considered good luck. One poor man was nearly trampled outside a courtroom because someone spread a rumor he'd shaken your hand. You don't know which version you prefer. The sun sets late these days. You sit on your steps, arms around your knees, watching the sky go from orange to gray. You think about all the people you've seen in those final minutes, the ones who screamed, the ones who laughed, the ones who whispered names like a lifeline. Historians still argue whether executioners ever became folk heroes. Some suggest they were seen as necessary evils. Others claim they were despised outcasts. A few stories paint them as quiet champions of justice in a broken world. You think the truth is simpler. You were never meant to be a hero. just someone who stayed when others walked away. A neighbor's cat curls up near your feet. The first time it wandered into your yard, you half expected it to drop dead. But now it visits often. Purrs like you're just a man. No stigma. No whispers. You pet its head gently. Maybe there's still room for small comforts. You light one more candle. Not for her, not for the job, for yourself. Because tonight you need it. There's talk in town of a new magistrate coming in, some noble's younger son, fresh from university, and full of reformist ideas. You overhear whispers at the market he wants executions moved indoors. Private, sterile, efficient. As if killing someone is a leaky roof that just needs fixing. You lean against a wall, arms folded, half amused, half numb. You've heard it all before. They try to make death quiet, but it always finds a way to speak. Still you're curious. He summons you one morning. Not a trial, not a scolding, an invitation. That's new. You wear your least tattered tunic and show up unsure if this is the start of praise or punishment. He's young, polite, offers you a seat and calls you Master Executioner, which might be the first time anyone's put those two words together without flinching. I've read your records, he says. Impressively detailed. You blink. My what? Your notebooks. Your spine tightens. I didn't realize those were public. They're not. Someone turned one in anonymously. You nod, slowly. I'd like you to keep writing, he continues. For the archive. It's important. You study his face. He's not mocking. He means it. You wonder which book he read. The one with the names, or the one with your own darkness stitched between the lines. One mainstream historical fact in a handful of progressive city-states during the late medieval and early Renaissance periods, executioners were eventually recognized as civic officials and granted limited protections. Some were even paid bonuses for maintaining detailed logs of executions and prisoner behavior, an early attempt at justice reform through documentation. He hands you a sealed letter and says, "Deliver this to the university scribe. They're compiling a history of capital justice." You leave the chamber dazed. Did you just get promoted? As you step into the sunlight, something shifts. A bird lands on your shoulder. Okay, no it doesn't, but wouldn't that be nice? Still, there's something lighter in your step. You think about the girl who asked for you the breadbasket from the brother, the grave markers you hid beneath earth and night. Maybe it mattered. Maybe someone noticed. Maybe it wasn't all just pain and splinters. One quirky tidbit. In Prague, there was a 15th century executioner named Jan, who retired early and became a respected herbalist. Locals visited him in secret for potions and healing salves. His grave is said to sprout night-blooming flowers, though no one can agree on the exact kind. Some say it's magic. Others say it's manure. Classic debate. You return home to find someone's left a bundle at your gate. Not garbage this time. A pie. Apple from the smell. There's no note, just a small cloth embroidered with the letters FS. You don't know anyone with those initials. You take it inside, sit, eat, and for the first time in months, it tastes like something other than duty. You light a fire that evening, not for warmth, but for company. You think about all the people you've met in this strange, grim profession. The condemned, the mourning, the curious, the cruel, the quiet ones who forgave you with their eyes, and the louder ones who cursed you with every breath. Historians still argue whether executioners left behind more harm or healing. whether they were tools of tyranny or reluctant shepherds at the edge of life. You think maybe it depends on the hands and what they try to carry. You walk to your shed, unlock the cabinet, and pull out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Your original axe, the one from your first execution. The blade is dull now. You haven't used it in years. It's been ceremonial for a while. But you unwrap it. Run your fingers along the worn wood, the scratches where your hands once trembled. You think I've been many things. Feared. Avoided. Sometimes thanked. Never loved. But I've always been here. You rewrap the axe and set it back. Not out of shame, but with the reverence one gives to a relic. Because it is one. Before bed, you add one final note to the first book. I was not just a hand for hire. I was a witness. I was the last kindness some people ever saw. And maybe, just maybe, that made a difference. You sleep well that night, not because the weight is gone, but because you've stopped carrying it alone. And now the fire dims. Your eyes grow heavy. The world quiets into the slow rhythm of night. You did good today, whether others saw it or not, whether they remembered or forgot. There's something deeply human in simply showing up for the hardest things in staying when others step away. Let the shadows of the gallows fade like mist receding from the hills at dawn. Let the cold stone steps give way to soft grass under your bare feet. You're no longer holding a blade. You're holding a candle. Just one small light. But it's yours. As you settle in, remember this: the role you played was never about cruelty. It was about carrying the burden no one else would. And while the world may never understand that, you do. You always did. So let yourself rest now. No voices calling. No knocking at your gate. Just the slow hush of breath. The steady pulse of sleep rolling in like the tide. The past is done. The weight is laid down. You've earned this peace. Good night, keeper of final stories. Your watch is over.